There are so many of these retro emulator handhelds on the market at the moment. New ones coming out every single week, and sometimes it pays to just sit back and wait a little while. So this little retro handheld is called the Powkiddy V10. It is one of now many of these kind of retro emulator handhelds that I own and I'm gradually amassing a collection of. And in fact, when this one came out, I just got my analog pocket, I just got the Anbernic SP console, and really, although a lot of people were raving about how great this is, I just couldn't justify it at the time. But the advantage of these things for us as consumers is that there are so many of them coming out that even when you finally get your hands on the latest one, the next one has already been announced. It's always this game of just chasing the next thing, which might be the perfect one. I'll let you in on a secret. There aren't any perfect ones. None of them are perfect. Some are cheaper than others, and I find that the cheaper ones tend to be the ones with a bit more charm, the ones that you can forgive their foibles that little bit more because you are paying so little. And speaking of paying little, the reason I've got one of these now, when I said I wasn't going to get one, is that it was on like a flash sale on AliExpress for like 23 pounds, and that was with the basic 64 gigabyte card loaded full of games. Then when I went on and checked, you had to get it in this colorway, which is like a Game Boy style colorway, which looks all right actually. It does look quite nice. I think I preferred the one that was like the American Super Nintendo with the grey and the purple buttons, but now I've got it does look pretty nice. And this one was with the 128 gigabyte card, and anyway, all told, once it was including the 20% tax to import it to the UK, and shipping was free from AliExpress, it came to just a smidge over £30 for this emulator console that's surprisingly capable for something pretty small. Let's just turn that volume down. Oh, speaking of volume, you know I was saying about the quirks before? There's no volume control on it. You have to hold, what is it now? You hold this plus button and then the left? Yeah, the left on the D-pad to quieten it down, right? So we'll just quieten that down a little bit. It goes into like a demo mode when it's been on for a little while. Where was I? So yeah, I could have got another one in a different color and that was very slightly more expensive. I just basically went through all the options on AliExpress to see what was the cheapest one I could get. And as I say, this thing with 128 gigabyte SD card loaded up with games, all ready to go for just a touch over £30 shipped to the UK. It was hard to say no. So yeah, a bit of an impulsive urge. I eventually picked one up. It is an advantage to sit back and wait to get these things sometimes. I have tried on occasion to keep an eye out for one that seems interesting, ones that seem like they offer something a little different. So like the Powkiddy consoles that came out a little while ago, the RGB 30 and the RGB 20SX, the ones with the square screens, that offered something a little different that appealed to me. And in the case of those, what I tried to do was pre-order those so I could get them as soon as possible. I could do some testing, put together a review and get that out on YouTube fairly quickly. But what I've found is that even when I try and do that, some people get them sent to them early, so they get review videos ready much quicker. Other people are in the USA and they'll get delivered more quickly than waiting here in the UK. So even when I try and do that, by the time I get a video together, YouTube is just awash with everybody releasing the video about this latest little handheld. So I've found that when I do that, it's not always really worth my while because my videos just get lost in the midst of those. Also, you don't know really if they're going to be any good. You know, it can have all the hype, people can get excited, and then when you get it and you test it, there'll be a few things that you think, that's a bit of a letdown, that's disappointing. And with this one, I knew it was going to be good because everyone had already got them and put out the reviews, and I'd watched all the reviews and the guides and everything else, and it seemed like it was going to be something that was pretty good. These are not necessarily a straightforward thing to buy. Most of the time it's like a hobbyist kind of purchase. They do require quite a bit of work and tinkering to get them up and running, to get your games just how you want them, which is something that does appeal to me, but I know it's not going to appeal to everybody. And sometimes I've watched videos where people say don't get these with the SD card that comes with it. They're low quality SD cards, the ROM selections are strange and so on, and I can kind of understand that. But when you get one of these and it's not got the SD card, You just want to play on it. You don't really want to be sitting for hours trying to set all the stuff up. You just want to play. So I find that if you can get one with the SD card, and it is pretty cheap anyway, it does let you have a bit of a play on it, a bit of a test out, and then you can set up your own ROM sets. You can curate your collections of games. You can set up the display settings and things at your leisure. Now, these are things that are rushed out. It very much feels like they're rushed out. No sooner has one been released than the next one has been announced. And in terms of support from the actual manufacturers, in terms of updates and things, it's few and far between. It's very much something that's fueled by the community of people who are into actually using these and the custom firmwares that you can use on them. And usually with these, what you'll have to do, like in the case of the Miu Mini, where you've got Onion OS, there's lots of different operating systems that you can use on these things. This one actually comes with Arc OS, which I've used before and which is really good. And all I've done in terms of sorting out any firmware on this is it doesn't have Wi-Fi. So that's something that's a bit of a letdown with it, but it's super cheap. So there's got to be compromises here and there. There is a USB-C OTG on the go socket. You just plug in a Wi-Fi dongle on the top, and then you can connect to the internet and you can update ArcOS. So at the moment, that's got the latest version of ArcOS running on this. It comes installed with loads of stuff, and the interface on ArcOS is really nice. So it's got arcade games, it's got Capcom CPS-1, CPS-2, CPS-3, it's got MAME, it's got Atari, it's got Atari Lynx, it's got WonderSwan, WonderSwan Color, PC Engine CD, Famicom, Family Computer Disk System, Super Famicom, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Virtual Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Game & Watch, SG-1000, Sega Master System, Mega Drive, Sega CD, Sega 32X, Game Gear, Neo Geo Pocket, Neo Geo Pocket Color, Open Ball, PlayStation, MSX, Doom, Pico 8, which took me a little while to get up and running properly with my Pico 8 login so that I can actually use Explore and download different games. Again, you need to be online for that, so you need to have the dongle sticking out the top. And RetroArch on there. So there's just so many things that you can play. The screen on this one is quite wide. I've tried loads of different emulators on, and they work really well. They run really well. It runs PlayStation games really comfortably. But for me, the main appeal was playing Game Boy Advance. It is exactly the right aspect ratio for playing Game Boy Advance. Where things are scaled up, they just look really, really good, even side by side with an actual Game Boy Advance console that's got the upgraded screens and things. These do look very, very good. So even just buying this as a Game Boy Advance console is great. Everything else, you can just see it as a bonus. So yeah, I mean, for the sake of £30, it's been really worth buying. And just like all of these things, the more new ones come out, the harder it is for them to shift the older ones. But you get time to weed out which are the ones that are actually good. There's lots of reviews out there for these different things. You can watch those and you can know which ones were the hits and which were the misses. And the hits are a pretty safe bet. So like you can see with this one here, I've got Advance Wars 2 on screen there. I mean, that is just perfect, isn't it? One of the things that was putting me off was the form factor. It's quite kind of stumpy, isn't it? I was expecting, normally I'd have things a little taller, so I thought it might be a little uncomfortable to hold. But you know what? The ergonomics are actually quite good. It's a strange thing, this console. It doesn't look like it's going to be nice to play on, and then I find I've been sat playing games for like 2 hours and my hands are still perfectly comfortable. It's much better designed than it kind of appeared to be at first. It's weird how it's got like this little detailing on the lower right, like the original Game Boy speaker, but the speaker's right in the middle here. But a central front firing speaker right in front of you, it's actually pretty good for when you're playing the game. So in terms of using the console, it's great. You know, I've got loads of these things, so it can very easily be compared to other ones that I use. It could very easily end up being ignored if I wasn't particularly impressed with it, but I am actually quite surprised at how much I'm enjoying playing on this one. I did spend some time going through, like, because when you get these with the SD cards, yeah, they can be kind of flaky quality. This seems to be fine. I've copied loads of my own games over to it and it's running okay. The actual ROM selections that come with them, to be honest, I quite like them usually. They're missing the main ones that you'd expect to see, the ones that would get them in more trouble with Nintendo. So a lot of like your Pokemons, your Marios and so on are missing from them. But you kind of find all sorts of random obscure stuff to play on there as well, which I often quite enjoy. The difficulty is when it comes to like the naming conventions. Sometimes you'll have a whole list of games that have like numbers in front of them, so you can't just alphabetize to find the game that you want. I've got sets of ROMs that I've kind of put together and got on other consoles, so I just ended up deleting a lot of the ones off the SD card that came with this and copying my ones across to it. And I've got it to a point now where I'm really happy with it. There's loads of games on there that I'm going to like to play, and it's a welcome addition to the collection. And as I say, the kind of Game Boy aesthetic, it's almost like a kind of brownish grey. It looks pretty good. I think I would have preferred some of the other ones, but I'm actually quite pleasantly surprised with how nice this one looks in the flesh. Now, when it comes to mods, I do like modding these things, and when it's a cheap one like this, it's absolutely no issue in terms of just kind of taking it apart and exploring inside it. I had a few ideas for mods I could do that I hoped would work. I spent hours trying to get them to work, and they didn't. The first thing is that I wanted to put a rumble motor in, like I've done with some other Powkiddy consoles before. But when I opened it up, it's a different chipset to the RGB 30 and 20SX, which actually has a little space on the PCB saying this is where the rumble motor goes. This doesn't. I spent quite a while with it switched on and opened up, probing with my multimeter, trying to see if I could find any points that would cause it to rumble, but alas, it didn't work. So I think it just simply doesn't support rumble at all. The other thing I wanted to do was, I mentioned before about having this little on-the-go adapter and the USB dongle at the top for Wi-Fi, which works well, but looks like you've got like a little aerial on top of the console. And when I opened it up, I noticed that inside the battery compartment, the battery is surprisingly small. There's a big empty space there, which I thought would be, I had this idea of doing an internal Wi-Fi dongle and trying to wire up to the internals of the USB socket inside. But the actual pins for the USB-C socket were really tricky to solder to, even with my microscope on and things. It just didn't seem to want to stick. So I tried that. The theory was sound. I wanted to wire up a USB-A female socket to the inside of here so I could just plug a Wi-Fi dongle in and keep it all internal. The theory is sound. I worked out all the pins to use, but it was just the actual logistics, the physical possibility of getting the wires to go on. The wires that I was trying to solder to were just that bit too thick to go onto those tiny little pins on the USB-C socket. So I ended up just cutting my losses in the end, and I just used a dongle. It's no harm really, but it's a shame because that little gap kind of got me all excited, and I thought you could fit something in there. So if someone wants to run with that and wants a few more details in terms of what would need soldering where, let me know. I'd love to see someone actually get that working on one of these consoles. The other mods that I wanted to do, let's see, what was it? There were two. So there was the rumble motor, there was the Wi-Fi. Neither of those worked out, unfortunately. I spent quite a bit of time on that, but again, I like doing that sort of thing. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. I'd actually ended up shorting out some bits on the USB-C socket and had to spend loads of time trying to desolder and separate those. But I got that all working in the end, and it's all part of the adventure, isn't it? The D-pad's actually pretty good on this. There were some slight false diagonals, but to be honest, it wasn't too bad. The face buttons feel great. The plus, minus, and select and start, a little bit clicky, but not too bad. The main issue I had was the shoulder buttons on the back. L1 and R1 were fine, but the L2 and R2 kind of felt like they were rattling about a bit. I'll shake that now. It's nowhere near as bad as it was. It feels much, much better because what I did was I made a few slight improvements. So when I had it all open, now to get this thing open isn't too bad actually. There are just 4 screws. If you remove the battery cover, you can see 2 down in the lower left and right and 2 in the upper left and right. They're just crosshead screws, so they're dead easy to get out. There are 2 more in the middle behind the battery, but don't pay any attention to those. They're just holding the motherboard in place. They're nothing to do with the shell. But even once you've removed those 4 screws, it's hard to get the shell apart. You will need a separator tool, and I've found that there are clips holding the shell together just above the triggers, just at the top of where the battery area is, and at the very top in the middle and the very bottom in the middle. To get those apart, start in this top corner, work a separator tool in there, and what you're trying to do is kind of open out the front shell to unclip away from the back shell. So you kind of push it in the gap, slide your way down the side, it'll pop the 2 apart on the side, then you'll be able to pull open, and I've found that the bottom one is easiest to get out. It's a bit tricky because it kind of goes around the corner and things like that, But if you start from the top, slide down and pop the sides apart, it's easy to get the bottom or the top apart if you're careful. And then once that's off, the other one will pop off easily and you've got the whole thing open. So the mods that I did were, I did the kind of tape mod that I've done before on the D-pad. Just basically to avoid those false diagonals, you just leave part of the contact points on the PCB exposed. And also, if you look at the traces, and I'd seen this on another video, I forget which video it was. If you look at the traces, one of the traces for the left input actually passes right through the center of where the D-pad goes. So in time, it could wear that away. I took 10mm wide Kapton tape and just put it down in a cross diagonal, one direction and then the other. That'll protect the central section. It also restricts the amount of contacts there. And because I was having some issues playing on Celeste on Pico 8, so playing most things was fine, but with that, when you very quickly have to swap from diagonals to horizontals and so on, I was having a few issues. Just put that on, test it again, and it did give me a lot more control over those diagonals and directions. But to be honest, it wasn't a massive amount of difference, but it does feel like it was worth doing while I had it open. When it comes to the shoulder buttons, when you open up, there's like a little square rubbery pad on the cross section on R1 and L1, but nothing on L2 and R2. That was a really easy fix. You don't need anything in addition. I just peeled it off, say for example the R1, peeled off that sort of foam square, cut it in half, and then stuck each half, one on R1, one on R2. Did the same with L1, peeled it off, cut it in half, stuck one on L2, one on L1, and then when I put it back together afterwards, it meant that the middle ones weren't rattling about and making all that noise. They had a slightly more satisfying connection and felt a bit more consistent with the L1 and R1, so that was worth doing. And then one more thing that I did was with these plus and minus and the select and start, same sort of thing. Select and start had foam pads, plus and minus didn't, so peeled them off, cut them in half and sort of shared them out a little bit more. But to be honest, you're not pressing these particularly often. It just means that they rattle and echo a little bit less, so that was worth doing. To do the tape on the D-pad and to do the connections on select, start, plus and minus, you do have to unscrew and remove the motherboard. If you're removing the motherboard, you need to unclip and remove the ribbon for the screen first. Just be careful with that. It's quite easy to do. It won't really cause you many problems, but just be aware of that if you're dismantling it. Yeah, there are some quirks to this. As I say, there's no volume. You have like a lot of different button shortcuts with this kind of plus and minus. So I don't really know why they've put those in there and not just had a volume dial somewhere. But if something's got something a little different, even if it's a weird way that it works, it kind of adds to its charm when it's something cheap like this. It's not like where I've paid top dollar like I did with the Analog Pocket, and every slight quirk really upsets me because I should expect better. Like, I paid just over £30 for this. It plays a whole generations of consoles, thousands of different games. It's really quick to pick up and play. It fits in my pocket. It's really good. And as I say, it definitely feels like it's paid off in this case, not jumping straight on the bandwagon of the latest release or getting all excited when I see everyone saying, do you know what, this one is actually really good. You'd be surprised at how many times a new thing comes out and people are saying, this is the one. And then the next month something else comes on which is even better, and this one might be the very one. They're all pretty good, and they all have their flaws, but I enjoy collecting them. I enjoy setting them up. I enjoy playing on them, and I certainly have no regrets about this one here, and I'll no doubt continue to be gullible enough to buy new ones as and when they come out. But yeah, I think the Powkiddy V10, I am pleasantly surprised. It's a lovely little handheld. It's quite customizable, and I think the fact that it comes with ArcOS as stock is a big selling point for this one. So yeah, there are loads of videos out there already, as I say, selling this thing to you, telling you all about how great it is, showing you how to set it up just right. You don't need me adding to that, but I'm just saying, like, I did a few mods to the buttons that I hadn't seen elsewhere in that much detail, so you've got those in this video. It's something that I thought sounded kind of cool, but at this price point is definitely worth checking out. And my main message is just that it is worth paying attention to what comes out. I don't think it's worth trying to keep up with everything and buy all of these things. I think you can just afford to pick and choose, especially if, like me, it's coming out of your own budget with these things. The fact that we are in a situation where there are new, exciting handheld consoles coming out all the time, I mean, that is no bad thing at all. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, I got this thing. I wasn't going to do a video, and then I did a few mods, and then I thought, I fancy having a bit of a ramble. I've not had a good ramble in a while. So as I mentioned before, the other Powkiddy consoles, like the RGB30 and the RGB20SX, I really, really like. I'm a particular fan of the RGB20SX, even though it wasn't that popular with other people. So what I will do is I will link those two up here for you to have a look at afterwards if you've not seen them before. Hopefully you enjoyed that, and otherwise I will see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.